Language shapes our world, and how we use it matters. Welcome to the Sociolinguistic channel, where we explore the fascinating relationship between language and society. In this video, let's start with the basics. What exactly is sociolinguistics? Simply put, sociolinguistics is the study of how language interacts with society. It's about understanding how the way we speak is influenced by factors like age, gender, class, ethnicity, and geography, and how our use of language can reflect and even shape those social categories. We all speak differently depending on where we're from or who we're talking to, right? For example, you might use a more formal tone with your boss than you would with your friends. That's sociolinguistics in action. It's about examining these different styles or varieties of language in various social contexts. Now let's cover 5 key concepts in sociolinguistics that will help you understand how language interacts with society. First up is speech communities. A speech community refers to a group of people who share the same linguistic norms or conventions. These norms govern the way they use language within that group, whether it's based on geographic location, profession, or even a shared hobby. For example, people living in the same region may develop similar accents or ways of speaking, creating a sense of shared identity through language. Next is code switching. This refers to the ability of a speaker to switch between 2 or more languages or dialects within a single conversation. Code switching often occurs in multilingual communities and can depend on context, topic, or the person the speaker is talking to. For example, a bilingual person might speak English at work, but switch to French when speaking with family. Code switching reflects how flexible and dynamic language use can be in different social contexts. Third, we have Diglosia. This is a situation where 2 varieties of the same language coexist within a community, each serving different purposes. One variety is typically seen as more formal and used in official settings, while the other is used in informal, everyday situations. A good example is in Arabic-speaking countries, where modern standard Arabic is used in news and formal writing, while regional dialects are used in daily conversations. Another key concept is linguistic variation. This refers to the differences in language use between peoples or groups, which can be based on factors like region, class, gender, or age. Sociolinguists study these variations to understand why people speak differently in different contexts, and what social meanings are attached to these differences. For instance, people from different regions may pronounce words differently or use different vocabulary, reflecting their social identities. Finally, let's talk about language and power. Language is often tied to power structures within society. The way we speak can reflect and reinforce social hierarchies. In many contexts, a standard language variety is viewed as prestigious, while other dialects or accents may be stigmatized. This dynamic influences social mobility and perceptions of authority. Let's now move on to an important concept in sociolinguistics, that of language and identity. Our language choices are deeply connected to our identities. Whether we realize it or not, the way we speak says a lot about who we are, where we come from, and even what groups we want to belong to. For example, consider accents. People often make judgments about someone's background or social status based on their accent. In some cases, people might even consciously change their accent or way of speaking to fit in with a particular group. This ties into what we call prestige varieties of language. those that are socially favored, and how people may adopt these forms to gain social capital. We also need to discuss language and gender. Research in sociolinguistics has shown that men and women often use language in different ways, but these differences are not inherent to gender, they're socially constructed. Society shapes our expectations of how men and women should speak, and this affects everything from word choice to tone. Let's go back to one of those key concepts of sociolinguistics. That is the relationship between language and power. Language is never neutral. It's often used as a tool to assert power, control, or dominance. One way this manifests is through language standardization. In many societies, there's a standard language that's considered more correct or prestigious than other varieties. But who decides what's standard? It's often those in positions of power. Let's take English as an example. The way English is spoken in certain parts of the world, particularly in places like the UK or the US, is often seen as more prestigious than other varieties like Indian English. These varieties may be stigmatized even though they're just as legitimate as the so-called standard. This brings us to the idea again of linguistic discrimination, where people are judged, often unfairly, based on the way they speak. It's a form of bias that can affect everything from job prospects to social interactions. Sociolinguists use a variety of research methods to study language, but let's start with one of the most common: interviews. Sociolinguists often sit down with people to ask about their language use and record their natural speech. This method gives them data to analyze how people speak in different contexts, like formal versus informal situations. For example, if you're studying how people in a city speak, you might interview people from different neighborhoods or backgrounds to see how their language varies. Another key method is participant observation. This is where the researcher immerses themselves in the community they're studying to observe language use in real time. Imagine you're studying how teenagers use slang at school. You'd spend time in the school listening to conversations and noticing when and how slang is used. This method helps sociolinguists get a more authentic sense of how language is used in everyday life, beyond just interviews. Next, there's surveys. Sociolinguists often use questionnaires to collect data from larger groups of people. This method is useful for getting a big picture view of how language varies across a wider population. For example, researchers might ask thousands of people in different regions how they pronounce certain words, and this data can reveal patterns in language variation. Now, one of the most famous examples of sociolinguistic research is William Laboff's study on New York City's department stores. In the 1960s, Laboff wanted to see how people pronounce the R sound in words like fourth floor, and whether it differed across social classes. He went into department stores with different social clientele, like Saks, which attracted wealthier shoppers, and Klein's, which traditionally had more working-class shoppers. By asking store clerks for directions to the fourth floor and analyzing their responses, Laboff discovered that higher status speakers were more likely to pronounce the R, while lower status speakers often dropped it. This became a classic study showing how language can reflect social status. To wrap things up, let's consider the question, why does sociolinguistics matter? Think about it. Language isn't just a tool for communication. It's deeply connected to our identities, social relationships, and even power dynamics. The way we speak can tell others where we're from, what social groups we belong to, or even how we want to be perceived. Sociolinguistics gives us the tools to analyze these connections and uncover the social meaning behind our words. Let me give you a real-life example. In the UK, there are distinct accents that can quickly tell people where you're from, like the famous received pronunciation, or RP, often associated with London and traditionally seen as prestigious. Compare that with the Scouse accent from Liverpool. Studies have shown that people with an RP accent tend to be viewed as more educated or authoritative, even though the Scouse accent is just as valid and rich in history. But here's the problem. These perceptions aren't neutral. When one accent is seen as better than another, it can lead to linguistic discrimination. Sociolinguistics helps us understand this bias, showing us that there's no correct way to speak, only different varieties of language shaped by our social environment. This knowledge can push us towards greater linguistic equality, helping break down stereotypes based on how someone sounds. It also matters in multilingual communities, so common in the 21st century. Take code switching, for example. In many countries, people switch between languages or dialects depending on who they're talking to. This isn't random. It's a social skill that reflects a speaker's ability to navigate different cultural norms. For instance, a bilingual Spanish-English speaker in the US might use English at work, but switch to Spanish at home with the family. Understanding this flexibility highlights how language adapts to different social settings. So why does sociolinguistics matter? It shows us that language isn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about power, identity, and connection. And the more we understand that, the more we can appreciate the diversity of ways people communicate. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you've just seen, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future content on language and society. See you next time, and remember, language is power.